Welcome to Speak with Eve. I'm your host, Eve Eurydice. Today's guest is Selina Mills, the author of Life Unseen, A Story of Blindness. Welcome to the show, Selina. It's wonderful to
Hello.
have you. Are you in London?
I am in London. I am sitting on my sofa in front of my bookcase.
I'm super fond of you. But let's start with, since your book is about life unseen, the story of blindness, what is your definition of blindness? What are we discussing here?
It's a good question. Because of course there's a very legal definition, which is, I think it's, you can only see 200, less than 200 yards. And the UN definition, which is used by the World Health Organization. But for me, it's one of functionality. So you could see color, you could see misty bits, you could see blurry bit, but you might not be able to function very well. So even though you can see light and dark, or color, or misty bits, or even tunnel vision, where you can see bits of a picture but not the whole picture. For me, blindness is very personal, and it's on a spectrum. It can be anything from, if I don't have glasses on, I really can't function, to I've got a tiny bit of vision, or I've got no vision at all. But it's on a spectrum, and I think that's probably one of the reasons I wrote the book, is that no one believed me when I said I was legally blind. And I'm like, yep, no, I am.
Well, that's because you carry yourself. You're perfectly functional, which you are. And I think that's one of the most endearing parts of you. You don't think of it as something that is outside the norm, but it is within the norm.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
In a sense, it's all statistics. I mean, I understand that there are definitions, but the norm is just statistical. There may be a small community somewhere in the world where the majority is legally blind. In that small community, wherever that might be, that is the norm, and the oddity would be to actually see.
There's a short story written by H.G. Wells called The Country of the Blind, which is exactly that. This man goes off into the Amazon and he finds this community, and they're all blind. So he's the anomaly, and he has to learn, and then he falls in love, and he has to decide whether the father says, yes, you can marry her, but you have to be blind in order to join us. And so he has to decide.
But like this kind of conversation about blindness, which we're going to have, does apply to disability of all kinds, and I believe that we're all somewhat disabled, and as we get older, become slightly more disabled, and that is absolutely normal. Yeah.
1 in 5 in the West. So USA and Europe, it's 1 in 5 of us will have a disability, and that could be granny. No, not even by age, just in the general life. Population. And it goes up as you get older.
Especially
and
with our sight.
Yes, well, no, sight, hearing, mobility. It can be many things. And sometimes it can be everything all at the same time. Yay!
Yeah.
So no, I wouldn't like to put, and I don't put blindness on a pedestal. Although, really interestingly, there was a John Hopkins study done a couple of years ago, and it asked people if they had the choice as they got older to have HIV, cancer, or blindness, which one would give them the most fear. And blindness came top. That's the one that would terrify people. God. Yeah, not that we want any of these things, but I mean, it's just interesting that that's the thing that scares people the most.
That is insane. That ancient Greeks considered blindness a path toward more wisdom, because you kind of look inwardly and you understand the world through your third eye and through your inner wise radar, your inner instinct.
But you're not, I mean, I think that's one of the things I think you and I have talked about in the past, which is, what if you're not Tiresias and you don't have inner vision? And you don't, I mean, what if you're really boring and blind and blind? What if you don't have inner prophecy inside you? I mean, do you know what I mean? That might be quite problematic.
Tiresias really had the best of all worlds.
Well, he's top
was
dog,
a man,
top
a
dog.
woman, slept with every gender, tried everything. That's like the ultimate pan-human.
Okay. He doesn't count.
I still do believe that, maybe I'm idealizing it a little, but I believe that like a farmer in the village who is blind will have to use his other senses more than someone who's not blind in order to get by.
No, it's myth.
Well, that's the Greek. That's the Greek myth.
Yeah, the Greek myth. Well, the thing is that people say that all the time. So they go, well, you must smell better and you must touch better and you've got a really good memory. And you're like, okay. So the reason we know that's not true is that Harvard did a study on this, and they took twins, one blind, one not blind, and they kind of made them do things like touch eggs or touch something. Anyway, touch something. Anyway, it turns out exactly the same part of your brain is being used whether you see, hear, touch or taste. So it's really a question of how you use those senses. And therefore it's not because you sort of miraculously get a better sense of touch or taste or memory, although you might be gifted with musical talent, you don't know, but it just means that you've learned to use it, and it still operates exactly in the same part of your hippocampus than seeing does. So it's just not true, but it's totally understandable. Why wouldn't you want to have a better deal if you can't see, or if you've lost some sense of any kind, hearing or anything, you're better at something else. It makes you feel better, but I don't think it's actually technically true.
I think that if it were me, I would focus better because I would have to. I would have no choice.
Yeah, but you would use it better. You would use that talent or that skill set to your advantage. You wouldn't necessarily. I mean, you still might have a rubbish memory.
True.
So it's not. And I've got friends who can't sing a note. You know, according to legend and myth, they should be able to be sort of perfect harmony and have perfect pitch, and it's all rubbish. Right. So I don't think it doesn't guarantee talent. I don't mean that,
but I mean that whatever ability you have, you will try to hone it a little more in order to survive, for basic survival.
Maybe I don't know if it's more or just you use it. It's just because your brain can use it and goes, okay, I'll use that bit of my brain.
Yeah, exactly. This is like my heritage. So my logic
no.
programmed a certain way.
No, it's a nice one. I mean, actually, it's nice. It's nice to think one is wiser than everyone else, or that one's better in bed.
Yeah, like Homer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you want to be the father of Western literature? Hey, come on.
He was because he wasn't distracted.
Yeah.
So he put all the stories together. The other parts were busy getting paid, having babies, getting laid, raising babies, all this stuff.
I know, but there's a whole thing in some also more research in the 30s. But anyway, so these two researchers went to somewhere which was the old Yugoslavia, and they researched people in reveries who danced and whirling dervishes. And they seem to look like they're blind, like their eyes glaze over and they kind of look a little bit, sort of out of it. But they could recite the entire of beautiful, beautiful epics and things. I suppose that's what the idea is, that, you could be sort of blind, but blind in the sense of you're overwhelmed by other senses and therefore you don't need your sight. You're in your own.
Yeah, in yoga, we very much do that. And the Buddha, suggested that we do that you focus on there is the different words for it, but basically you look within toward your third eye and you do not see what's happening around, and
you go within.
The longer you can sustain that, the better your practice becomes. Not being part of the world of Maya, of the world of illusion, the materialist world, is one of the goals.
The book I regret is that I didn't have time to go into other religions. I stuck to Judaic-Christian beliefs. I didn't have time to look at Buddha or I did look at Navajo Indians. Navajo Indians believe that the earth was created from sound and not from light. There is one religion that believes that the earth was created from the sound sort of heavens and earth separated because of that sound.
Yeah, it must be,
which kind of makes sense. I'm assuming more than not the sun burning or something like that. So it's kind of interesting.
Your book tells us the story of how blindness has been received. I just started with the Greeks, but how blindness has been received through Western Judeo-Christian history, and then you frame that with your own life story. So it's a little bit of a memoir, like this is my experience, and this is how blind people experience this in different times in history. What's interesting to me is that there is no binary opposition in the way that you experience and describe blindness. It's not the lack of sight.
Yes, which has been a caricature of. I mean, if you think about the Bible, it starts with in God. When God created the world, it was and there was light, and the light was good, and the darkness was not so good. Mm-hmm. So you've already got a binary opposition that's been set up for us for a long. It's not our fault that we have the binary opposition. It's no one's to blame. No one's to be told off. It's just that by creating that, it's made light good, dark bad. Mm-hmm. But if what's sad about that is that it's not true, because there's some pretty cool things in the dark. Yes. And there are beautiful phosphorus fish that live in the complete dark. That darkness is also, and you can't, is it chiaroscuro? So you need light, darkness, in order to create light on a page. Yes. So the two there's an independent sort of dependency, and also there's a big murky bit in the middle, and that sort of, we don't talk about that. Like we talk about sort of these intricate moments of light and dark. But my favorite sort of comparison is that on a chat show by Ellen, the very famous doyenne of daytime TV, she had a game called Musical Chairs, and on this game everyone was blindfolded and had to crawl around the stage to find the prizes, and they had to push, they basically had to get there before other people who were blindfolded, and they got cars and holidays. And you think, oh, okay, well, guess what? In the 13th century in France, the top game was in the village. It was called is it le garçon à l'aveugle? It's le cochon à l'aveugle. So you take a pig and you release it in a pen, and then you put 10 blind people in the pen, and the person to get the pig gets it, which is a very valuable thing in the 13th century. But meanwhile, you've beaten up all your blindy friends in order to get the pig. So interesting that we haven't changed so much between the 13th century medieval France and Ellen talk show, which no longer is on the air,
thankfully. But yeah, so basically what you're saying is that the audience laughs at the people who
pantomime. Yes, exactly,
mocked.
The pantomime
They're
of
mocked
it
for not being able to find the gifts, or they fall on each other, or
which is very sort of physical theatre. And I mean, I was thinking about it. I did discuss it with a few people, and I said, why is it funny? I mean, what is funny about someone who can't see? And they were like, well, it's not so much that they can't see, it's the way that they are now functioning in order to find the pig or find the cars or whatever it was. And that they are away from the normal. So again, it's the sort of the gaze changes. And I just thought, oh really? But the fact that it hasn't changed for thousands, like we haven't got over that yet, is a little bit sad.
Yeah, well, there was a game, I'm not sure what it's called in English, where we would be when we were kids, you would get blindfolded, and if you touched anyone in the room, then you could pass the blindfold to them, and they would run from you and hide and try to avoid you, and you'd have to find someone to give the blindfold to. Yeah,
that's not so offensive.
Yeah, it wasn't. No, it wasn't offensive, but I never found it really frightening.
I think that's the thing is it. I wouldn't want to claim, because I imagine if you're older and you've seen all your life, to suddenly lose your sight, or to lose it, or from macular degeneration or something like that, it is a shock. It is a life-changing event. It's not. Yes. Let's not pretend it's not hard and it's not difficult. But I would say that if you're born with it, or very early on in your life, that it is completely, I have been able to adapt. I have friends who adapt. You find a way, and it's not as dreadful or tragic, which is the way that literature and painting has depicted blind people throughout the ages. It's only now that we can say that. Like, it's almost, this is the first time, there's an amazing writer called Georgina Klieg who wrote about Helen Keller and just said, look, Helen Keller makes out being blind is this really jolly hockey sticks, jolly fun, but actually it was really hard for her. She was investigated by the CIA, I mean, because they said, like, there's all these myths that we've got to challenge, and that's true of disability in general, but I was just choosing blindness. I mean, for me, it's a fascinating subject, because I'm going through it myself, because I'm losing my sight, and I have one eye which works on my left eye, and the other one doesn't work, and I'm still, as they would say, trundling along. And it seemed odd to me that people treated me differently when I had a cane and sunglasses. People patted me and prayed for me, and suddenly I was
patronizing you.
Yeah, I was a victim, not a person, and I found that really hard. And I think everyone would find it hard. It's like nobody wants to be treated like a child,
an invalid, or someone who's not fully independent.
Tough. No, and the word invalid, even, I mean, like, I've got friends who cannot care for themselves and they have PAs, but my God, do they live life? So
that's beautiful.
No, they might live life more than I do because, or someone with full mobility, because they use their minds and they've decided to chase their dream of, I don't know what it would be, but I can think of 3 people immediately who are wheelchair users and they're still arsey. It's not like that changed them. It's in fact, and you don't. In the other problem is like, well, I don't necessarily want to identify myself as blind activist who's like really shouty and fighty. I'm me.
Exactly.
I'm me.
Exactly.
And that's true for everybody.
Because then that would limit you and everybody else to speak on that topic. But if you wanted to write a book about something completely unrelated to anything to do with disability, people would say, well, I thought she just understands this one thing.
Exactly.
This is what you are meant to represent in our society. The way that disability has been treated in the past few decades has changed a lot, and there have been a few maybe improvements, but overall this kind of separateness and separation, I think, is not positive. The integration is the way to go.
So in America, it was the ADA that significantly changed how, because the law then said, look, you've got to deal and engage with disability. You can't just shove it under the carpet. I think that changed things. I think the Paralympics changed things because suddenly there were these extraordinary athletes, even though they're super inspirational. And for some people, that's really annoying. I think I told you once about a blind gentleman who climbs Mount Everest. And I'm like, why? Why would you do that? It's cold. So you sort of have to balance. And what came out of the 90s and the early 2000s was this phrase that was used continually and still is, which is nothing about us without us. And I find that phrase very helpful. It means don't make decisions that which are nothing to do, like you just think you're doing good and like poor blind people or poor disabled people. No, we are part of the decision of what would help us most. And I think that has become much more mainstream. I don't know if you guys have this thing called the social model of disability. So you could look at disability as a charitable thing, as in, oh, poor people who've got blindness, we must help them and pray for them or whatever. And then you have the medical model, which is, oh, we need to fix them. Yep, they're definitely in trouble. But the social model, which is what ADA was sort of based on, was that it's not the person who's disabled, but society who disables people. That has changed a lot of governments and legal and sort of societal views. But it's coming through. It's not there completely, but it's coming through. That has changed.
So how is society disabling people?
Well, if you choose to build a new building and you choose to have, let's say, everything from a bad website that doesn't read it to you to having a handle on a door that's just way too high, or a sink that doesn't move so you can't reach it, or braille on the lift so you don't know which lift floor you're going to, and you don't integrate it into your thinking from the very beginning, then you're choosing to do things as an add-on. It's not part of your thinking. It means you're excluding a lot of people. So if you don't have a ramp, and which is the most obvious one, that means mothers with babies, people on crutches, people using wheelchairs. Maybe you actually, for me, it's very helpful because I find stairs really hard. It's about integrating thinking into including everybody from the very beginning of a project.
That's definitely inclusive, which is what we're agreeing on. And I think that, again, like understanding that we're all in some way disabled, whether it's psychologically or physically or socially. I can name ways in which most people I know well, that I know well enough, I know intimately enough to know really how they live. So not how they present themselves to the world, but how they actually experience life. I believe that they are disabled in some way that is glaring.
Do you know what the myth is, where it comes from? So the myth is, there is a theory or a thought, which is that disability comes from a Marxist take on the world, which is the world was sort of, the capitalist world was all about factories and being able to go work in the factory. And if you can't work in the factory, then you're disabled from the means of production and the creation of wealth and capital, and therefore you are disabled.
Oh, wow. That makes sense.
It would seem the French definitely have used the sort of negative of ability, so that's been around for a while. But it would make sense. So basically that's what we're saying, is that if you're not making money and being successful, then you're a failure, and therefore you are disabled from society. reality. And I think a lot of people feel that.
Again, that's the difference from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to what was happening before. I mean, when we didn't have electricity, that's a very simple example. For tens of thousands and thousands of years, there was no electricity. So the many hours of the day that we now see, people didn't see anyway. People wrote in candlelight, which is very limited eyesight, in caves. So our experience of the primacy of sight and what you just described, which is the primacy of engaging in capitalism, in commerce, in making money. That is all very recent and brand new, and it changes our perspective about all of natural human that have always been on a spectrum.
Well, the thing I used to like about the medieval period, which I discovered, which was if you were blind, they often kept you were either sort of abandoned at the city walls, not so good, but you could also more than likely stay home and be the one who was rocking the baby, or you'd go and be a nun, or there was a place for you. And the 19th century comes along and there is no place for you. There is nowhere. And you get sent to the workhouse and the poorhouse. In America, it's really the same thing. There were all these big schools for blind people, kids, but they were taught to basket weave and make sails and stuff. There was no choices. I mean, it really wasn't until Braille came along that sort of completely gave, it was allowed you to educate yourself. The notion of blindness as its sort of unique disability, even though it's mentioned in the Bible and Jesus cures the blind quite a few times, actually, it's not as sort of damning as it became. The 19th century was so damning in the West, certainly. I'm not sure. I can't speak for other countries. I just think that this division and this isolation and the sort of, you're right, the word normalcy is a really good word, because it's so overdated as an idea, and yet we all have, I don't know if this is quite a dangerous territory to go on, but you could say it's like sexuality. It's sort of all different spectrums, and people fixed. But we like to have a fixed notion, because the 19th century, also that's the where the medicalization comes. And you have articles in the Lancet and it goes, they could not see, and then we stuck a straw in, and then we took out the cataract, and then he could see again. So, bingo. So cataract operations were massive. They started in 1728, although it had been happening in India a long, long time before with straws. But in terms of having functionality, 1728, man goes, what's his name? William Cheselden, does the first operation, and he's learnt from somebody in France, and there's somebody else who's, and suddenly it's like a miracle. It's like, if you can fix blindness, you're like Jesus. You get equated with it. So it's sort of like, I think what I find hard about blindness and its story is there's such, why can't you be fixed? Why can't you be cured? Why, in this modern day and age, why can't we sort all of this out? And actually it turns out maybe the moral of my tale is it's okay that we're not all perfect. It's okay that we're not all these sort of, that we are as a race, as a human race. I'm sure there are blind tigers and gorillas in the woods.
Exactly. My dog, Venus, who just passed away, she was 19. And her cataracts was all, you could see in her eyes, her beautiful big black eyes. You could see this giant cataract. And yet her sense of smell, her instincts.
Are you comparing me to your dog?
I'm just saying that I was thinking of the medicalization. That we're just saying, you're developing cataracts, that's a disease, you need surgery. You need to immediately find an eye surgeon. And it's like this compulsion, this obsession with fixing things and medicalizing things. I mean, I could extend this to pregnancy, the most normal thing in the world, and now you need a doctor, you need a surgeon, you need to book your birth in a hospital. It's the same general urge. My dog, who to me she was borderline human, she lived with it, and it didn't change her quality of life. And just because she's not of our species, there wasn't the expectation that she had to go under the surgical intervention so she could see better. It didn't affect her. It didn't affect her life at all.
I had once a taxi driver pick me up, and he goes, what's wrong with you then?
Oh,
so
my
I went,
God.
So I said, cataract one eye, blind the other. And he went, well, can't they laser it? And I went, no, it's in a tricky place, complicated, very brief. I tried to keep it brief.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, I had a dog once, Bella. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yes. And he says, yes, she got cataracts. But she was all right. She bumped around, and, she did her business in the garden, and, she had her dinners. And he said, oh, but then one day she went into the DVD player and she cut her eyes, so we had to put her down.
Oh, God.
And I just thought, oh, God, here we go. Is that what's going to happen to
that's
me?
A terrible, I know, that's a terrible ending. He started kind of okay, but...
It was just like, he does your business. If you can't do your business in the garden, and he's going to put you down. I was like, okay, thank you. Oh. Feeling good.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, but I'm just like, thank God your story was happy. It was like, yeah, we're all in this together.
In my experience, like my first and best friend when I was a kid was the boy next door in the apartment next door, and he was deaf. I didn't experience him being deaf as anything different. We were so close, we communicated perfectly. No. I mean, I still love him to this day very deeply, and I didn't speak sign language, and he didn't speak. He knew some sign language, but we didn't use it, and it didn't affect anything in our beautiful connection for years. When I met you, it was the same thing. I really didn't believe that there was anything more different with you or with your eyesight. And then one time, I think we were at the bar or something, and you took out the glass eye, and I was like, oh, wait, what? But there was nothing in our connection, in our friendship, in our conversations that would have been different whether you were fully sighted or not. That's what I'm saying.
But that might be the way you are. I think that's the nice thing about you, is that you accept everybody on their own terms, and you accepted me on my terms. But I don't think everyone does do that. And when I get out my white cane, or if my friends who are deaf have to like lip read and like follow you a bit more carefully, or my friends who are wheelchair users and they get treated badly on the train because for the people who consider it a pain in the butt, it's not actually, it's a pretty basic thing. There is a lot of aggression towards disabled people, and that's why you have to create laws. Because there is aggression, there's failure, there's also cruelty. I think, again, it's sort of to do with the fear. So rather than dealing with your own fear, there's a sort of cruelty going on. I think disability is an otherness. It's like, why blackness matters, why disability matters, why blindness matters. It's because it's considered other, and otherness is not well tolerated in society in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that must stem from what we were talking about, monolithic push for productivity. What is your valuation in society? How much do you produce?
God, I'm not very productive. Yeah, it took me 10 years to write a book.
Which is, to me, profoundly anti-humanist way to understand each other. So how can we upgrade, change this perception that you're describing, which is pretty unacceptable? Can we do that in our lifetimes?
I hope so. I think it's already getting slightly better in my lifetime. I certainly don't think I would have been having this conversation, 10 years ago with you. And I certainly don't think my book would have sold so well had 10 years ago, or even 15 years. So I think actually there is a shift in including everybody or more people. The laws have changed, which forces certain behaviours. It doesn't always work, though. I mean, things like the Paralympics, even though they have their issues of inspiration, what it does show you is that people are not invisible, and they're not, let's be ourselves. And I think that's important. There's much more writing, much more musical art. There's more people in government. More people are seen. And that in itself means that, ironically, whether seen or not seen, there's more people in places of power and places of change that show you that you can be that person too. And that in itself changes everything. And even though I struggled with the book and it took me a long time, I'm really glad I got to do it, because all I'm really saying is we're here and we're not going anywhere. It's not even like a call for action. It's more like, let's just do what we already know what to do. It's not like in 100 years' time, I hope that we don't have the word disability or the word, it's totally fine. Oh, she's blind, or she's deaf, or she doesn't hear, or they don't, blah, blah, blah. It's just part of being human rather than a separate thing. Yeah. And yes, you can get medical health and care if you need it, because no one should suffer. I'm not suggesting anyone should suffer. Mm-hmm. But I am suggesting, I guess I'd like mental attitudes to disability. We look at the body we've looked at the bodies in different ways over the centuries. And I think if we can normalize difference, then we're all right. Because then it's like, oh, okay, who cares?
Yeah.
And then I still think we're on the precipice of, we're still a little bit on the what's wrong with you then.
I'm glad you noticed. There's a lot wrong with me.
Are invisible. My husband had a stroke and his disability is very invisible. It's not very, and mine is too to some degree. Like unless you see me falling over or yesterday, what did I do yesterday? I think I drank, I used I seem to spend hours spraying myself with which I think is deodorant, but it turns out to be like window cleaner. It's just not it's just not fun. But it's in the bathroom and I reach for a tube and I'm like, oh, that's a spray thing. I've got lovely smelling armpits, but I don't think it's like probably peony mixed with chamomile. And it's fine. But anyway, the point is that my husband said to me he didn't understand how bad it was until one day we were going for a walk and I said, oh, look at the doggies. And he went, no, that's too rubbish bin. And I literally saw these sort of black bins and my brain, you fill in the gaps and you go, oh, okay, that's a dog, obviously. And he's like, no. So I think as you get to, that's maybe the question is, how do you get to know people? And that's how you get to know their limitations and the things they can do or they can't do. And
I must say, on behalf of the outliers and the misfits in the world, it's all a matter of perspective. Is it a dog? Is it not a dog? Is it right?
Is it armpit spray? Is it? Yeah. Well, it's a bit worrying though if you're spraying yourself with some like chemical disease.
But the fact of the question of what exactly we see and what is correct in what we see, I think is a matter for negotiation.
Yes, all the time, whether you're blind or not.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because our learning, our education, we spent 25 years being taught what to see, being taught what things mean.
Yes.
Were it not for all of that, where we just driven by our imagination, our own creative interpretive capacity, we would each see all kinds of things that were the same thing would look different to us.
Can you think about the language that you're using? So if you say you observe, you perspective or spectate, they're all about the vision is the way of securing knowledge, right? But actually that's not true. You can get knowledge from many different ways. Ultimately, like the reason art is accessible to blind people, you're like, well, how can an artist be, a blind artist? Well, because the impulse is from your mind.
Exactly. And which for some of us, creative people, matter more than the received learned impulses from the outside normative world. For me, the stuff that I imagine is always more interesting.
Yeah, but that has been true
than what I see.
And you could imagine the men in the caves thinking the same.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, actually, is that the creative impulse is not reliant on vision at all. It's the internal map that you create that's more interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, your own memory palace is just so much more interesting than the stuff that we see outside.
It could be it could be the mixture of the two. And I have friends who lost their sight as they got older, and their dreams are very complicated because they sort of have half sight and half not sight. And
that's such an interesting question. Yeah, what happens to the dream experience?
Well, it depends. Again, they've done studies on this, and Helen Keller was asked this, and she was like, "Oh God, not again." But she said, "No, because it's sort of like, do you dream special dreams?" And you're like, "No, you just dream like everyone else." The real question is if it's it's conceptual. Your dreams are conceptual. I'm being chased. I'm hugging someone or stuff, and it's based on the experience you have of the world. So it could be sighted, but it might not be.
Yeah, if you have been born without sight, then your experience of what you dream will probably include what you are familiar with, but it still will have the same effect. You will know if you're being chased in your dream.
Exactly.
You can tell if
Yes.
it's a nightmare.
And you can feel a dog woofing and wagging its tail and licking your face. In fact, I do think of people who are ill. They just sit and they stroke their dog. They don't necessarily look at it. It's a sensation.
Absolutely. I mean, at night, cuddle up with your dog in the dark, and it makes such a big difference. Just having that live body against your body.
As long as the doggy doesn't interfere with other activity, that's okay.
Yeah. They will, but not all of us. we can share. We have to bring them all into
The ark.
The ark, because we're more like them than we.
I mean, maybe that's the point, is that there's an equality here that people don't necessarily engage with, and they should. And it would help them. I mean, the thing is, that's what I find when I try not to lecture people, because I think that doesn't help. I try to say, I'm not sure. I remember doing a TV series, and this man said to me, "Could you act more blind?" I'm like,
oh my
good Lord.
God.
I know. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, could you feel for the door?" And I said, "But I know where the door is." And I think he wanted me to be like Scooby-Doo zombie, with my arms stretched out. And I was like, so sorry, I don't know what you mean. And I just thought about that afterwards, and I thought, okay, so yes, this is true of the sort of the commonplace experience, and it's been portrayed on TV and in books and in paintings. And Bruegel did a very famous painting of it's the quote from St. Matthew, the blind leading the blind, and they're all falling in a ditch. Yeah, there goes that blind guy, he's going to fall in a ditch. Yeah. It's not any. I really feel this. It's not anyone's fault that we have these perceptions. We have been taught them. They are ingrained in us, and my job as a historian, as a writer, is to pull that apart and to show you that it can be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've done a great job at it. We are all the same. Exactly, each in our unique ways.
Yes, dogs and all plastic bags.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're all the blind leading the blind.
So nice to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this conversation, and everyone out there, until next week, keep speaking light and shadow and life seen and unseen, and go against the norms. Thank you for listening.